My parents died suddenly, and my older brother became my guardian. But his disturbing changes made me question everything. When I started finding evidence, he tried to have me locked away. But the truth was too powerful to hide. I was 15 when my parents abandoned me. Well, kinda. They went on a trip to Hawaii and stayed in an Airbnb, but on the second day, they both died from a carbon monoxide leak. The officers said it was a faulty heater. My parents just never woke up. My brother Jake showed up 48 hours after I got the news. He was 22 and finishing college in Oregon, studying something with computers. We'd never been close. He'd visited maybe twice since starting college, mostly staying in his room playing games when he did. But there he was, in a rental car in the driveway, pulling me into a hug that smelled like energy drinks and airport food. "I know this is hard," he said, holding my shoulders, "but I'm your family now. We'll get through this together." And honestly, I was grateful. The house felt massive and empty. Mom's coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher. Dad's reading glasses stayed on his nightstand for weeks because I couldn't bring myself to move them. Plus, anything beats a foster home. I should have known that no one is immune to the feeling of greed, not even family. Anyway, Jake filed for guardianship immediately. He moved into his old room and set up his gaming computer. Within a month, he'd sold Mom's car because we don't need two vehicles. He turned Dad's office into a streaming room for his Twitch channel. When I mentioned the therapy sessions Mom had scheduled for my anxiety, he canceled them. "Talking to strangers about our business won't help," he said. Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister, called sometimes from Florida, but she was dealing with her own grief and trusted Jake completely. "You're so lucky to have such a responsible big brother," she'd say when I tried to tell her how weird everything felt. She didn't notice I'd stopped talking at school or that my grades were slipping. I helped Jake box up our parents' things because what else could I do? I defended him when teachers asked if everything was okay at home. I even smiled when he ordered pizza for the 5th night in a row instead of attempting Mom's recipes. But every night when he wasn't looking, I still set 3 plates at dinner. 6 months later, everything came crashing down. I'd found a brochure in Mom's desk for a grief camp for teens. She must have picked it up for one of her students. She was a guidance counselor, but I wanted to go so badly it physically hurt. When I showed Jake, he barely glanced up from his game. "That's the same week as Ashley's birthday trip to Vegas," he said. Ashley was his girlfriend who was close to moving in, already got the tickets. "But I really need this," I said. "Mom would have wanted Mom's dead," Jake snapped. "Stop living in the past. You need to move on like me." I called Aunt Sarah crying. She sighed and said Jake knew what was best. That night, Jake found me looking at the brochure again and he threw it into the fireplace. I said no, stop being dramatic. 3 days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Jake was streaming at 2 a.m. before stuffing clothes into my old soccer backpack and sneaking out. My hands shook as I ordered an Uber to the Greyhound station. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror, probably wondering why a 15-year-old was heading to the bus station at night with a backpack. I fell asleep in the car ride, and when I woke up, I was back at my house. Turns out the driver was Jake's best friend, and he ratted on me. "Try that again and I'm sending you to one of those troubled teen boarding schools," he said. "They'll straighten you out." A month later, a certified letter arrived from a law office downtown. Jake tried to grab it, but the mailman said it required my signature specifically. My hands shook as I signed. Jake watched me tear it open. "Your parents established instructions." The letter read, "If they failed to check in monthly, I was told to contact you directly. Please come to my office alone. Bring identification." I shoved it into my pocket and told Jake it was just spam mail, and that loser believed me instantly. I went during school the next day. Mr. Peterson's office smelled like old books and coffee. He locked the door behind me and actually checked the window before sitting down. My heart was racing. "Your parents came to me 2 weeks before their death," he said carefully. "They were very specific about these instructions." He pulled out a folder. Inside were photos of their rental cabin, bank statements, and pages of what looked like Jake's handwriting. "Your parents discovered Jake had been slowly poisoning them with your mother's sleeping medication." They found his journal documenting everything, including his plan to increase the doses during their anniversary weekend. My heart dropped. I stared at the photos, my hands trembling. The journal pages showed Jake's neat handwriting detailing dosage calculations, timing schedules, and observations about Mom's increasing fatigue and Dad's confusion. My stomach churned as I recognized the dates. They matched perfectly with when I'd noticed my parents acting strange before their trip. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses and pulled out another document. He explained that my parents had installed hidden cameras after discovering Jake's journal. The footage showed Jake crushing pills and mixing them into their evening tea. They'd confronted him the night before leaving for Hawaii, threatening to press charges unless he got help for his gambling addiction. Apparently he owed over $30,000 to various online casinos. I felt the room spinning. Mr. Peterson handed me a tissue box as tears streamed down my face. He showed me bank statements revealing Jake had already stolen nearly $20,000 from their joint accounts. My parents had changed their will just days before the trip, leaving everything to me with strict instructions that Jake receive nothing until completing addiction treatment. The lawyer explained my parents feared Jake might escalate if cornered. They'd planned to return from Hawaii and immediately file a restraining order. Instead, they never made it home. He pulled out a police report from Hawaii. Jake had called the Airbnb owner the day before my parents arrived, claiming to be Dad and asking detailed questions about the heating system. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up. When I returned, Mr. Peterson had prepared more documents. There was a letter from Mom, written in her careful script. She apologized for not protecting me better, for being too focused on trying to save Jake. She wrote about setting up a trust fund for my education, about her hopes for my future. I sobbed reading her words. Mr. Peterson explained the legal situation carefully. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial. Proving Jake had tampered with the heater from Oregon would be nearly impossible. However, the poisoning evidence and theft were documented clearly. He advised me to be extremely careful. Jake had already shown he was capable of violence when desperate. I asked what I should do. Mr. Peterson had already contacted Child Protective Services and filed reports with the police. He gave me a burner phone, insisting I keep it hidden and call him immediately if I felt unsafe. He also arranged for me to stay with a colleague's family temporarily while authorities investigated. Back at school, I couldn't concentrate. Every memory with Jake felt tainted now. I thought about all the times he'd made Mom and Dad's tea, insisting it helped them relax. I remembered finding Mom passed out on the couch multiple times in the weeks before their trip, Jake always nearby with explanations about her being overworked. The dismissal bell rang and I found Jake waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with crossed arms. His jaw was clenched tight. He grabbed my arm and toward the passenger seat. I tried to pull away but his grip tightened painfully. During the drive home, Jake kept glancing at me with narrowed eyes. He asked about my day, about where I'd been during third period when the attendance office called. I mumbled something about feeling sick in the bathroom. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. At home, Jake went straight to his computer while I escaped to my room. I could hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. Through the thin walls, I caught fragments, something about moving up timeline, about needing to handle a situation. My heart pounded as I quietly barricaded my door with my dresser. I texted Mr. Peterson on the he responded immediately, saying police would arrive within the hour with a warrant. I was to stay in my room and not engage with Jake under any circumstances. If Jake tried to enter, I should climb out the window and run to the neighbors. 20 minutes passed like hours. Jake's footsteps pounded up the stairs. He knocked on my door, then tried the handle. When it wouldn't budge, he slammed his fist against the wood. He demanded I open up, said we needed to talk about my behavior. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. I stayed silent, clutching the burner phone. Jake rattled the doorknob harder. Then I heard him walk away. My relief was short-lived. He returned with what sounded like tools. The scraping of metal on metal told me he was removing the hinges. I scrambled toward the window. The door crashed inward just as I got the window open. Jake's face was red with rage. He lunged forward but tripped over my barricade. I didn't wait to see more. I squeezed through the window and dropped onto the garage roof, then rolled off onto the lawn. My ankle twisted painfully on landing, but adrenaline kept me moving. I ran toward the Hendersons' house next door, screaming for help. Jake burst out our front door behind me. Mrs. Henderson opened her door just as I reached her porch. I collapsed inside, babbling about Jake in danger and needing police. She locked the door and called 911 while Jake pounded on it, shouting that I was having a mental breakdown. The police arrived in minutes, lights flashing. Jake immediately switched personas, becoming the concerned older brother worried about his troubled sister. He told them about my recent behavior, my running away attempt, my paranoid delusions about our parents. The officers separated us for questioning. I showed them the burner phone, begging them to call Mr. Peterson. One officer did while the other kept Jake in view. Within minutes, more police cars arrived along with detectives. They had the warrant Mr. Peterson mentioned. Jake's confident mask finally slipped as they read him his rights. The search revealed everything. In Jake's room, they found printed articles about carbon monoxide poisoning, Airbnb layouts, and HVAC system diagrams. His laptop contained searches about inheritance law and life insurance policies. They also discovered he'd purchased a plane ticket to Hawaii for the day before my parents' arrival, though he'd never used it. I watched from the Hendersons' living room window as they led Jake away in handcuffs. He stared at me with such hatred that Mrs. Henderson pulled me back from the glass. Child Services arrived to process the scene and arrange my emergency placement. I was allowed to pack a bag under supervision. In my room, I grabbed Mom's favorite sweater and Dad's old watch. I found the family photo from last Christmas, before Jake had started poisoning them. We all looked so happy, unaware of the monster among us. I tucked it carefully between my clothes, wondering if I'd ever feel safe again. The social worker drove me to a temporary foster placement while the investigation continued. The house belonged to a retired teacher named Mrs. Chen who specialized in emergency placements. She showed me to a small but clean room, telling me to take all the time I needed to settle in. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction with Jake since our parents died. All his calculated moves made sense now. Selling Mom's car to reduce evidence, canceling my therapy to keep me isolated, threatening boarding school to maintain control. He'd been playing a long game, and I'd almost lost. Mr. Peterson called the next morning with updates. Jake had been charged with attempted unaliving for the poisoning, theft, fraud, and several other crimes. The Hawaii authorities were reopening the investigation into my parents' deaths. With the evidence piling up, Jake would likely face additional charges soon. I asked about the house, about what would happen to me. Mr. Peterson assured me that my parents' will was clear. Everything would be held in trust until I turned 18. He would personally oversee my interests. In the meantime, Child Services would work to find me a suitable permanent placement, possibly with extended family once they'd been vetted. The news hit the local papers within days. College student arrested for poisoning parents made the front page. Our neighbors were interviewed, expressing shock. Several mentioned they'd noticed my parents seeming unwell, but assumed it was work stress. Ashley, Jake's girlfriend, told reporters she was devastated and had no idea about his actions. At school, I became either an object of pity or morbid curiosity. Some kids whispered when I passed. Others tried to befriend me just to hear gory details. I ate lunch in the library, finding comfort in the silence. Only my old soccer teammate Mia treated me normally, sitting with me without asking questions. 2 weeks into the investigation, Aunt Sarah flew in from Florida. She looked haggard, aged 10 years by grief and guilt. When she saw me at Mr. Peterson's office, she broke down sobbing. She apologized over and over for not listening, for trusting Jake, for failing me when I needed her most. I watched Aunt Sarah's shoulders shake as she wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. She reached for my hand across Mr. Peterson's conference table, her fingers cold and trembling. I pulled back instinctively. The last time we'd spoken, she'd dismissed my concerns about Jake. Now her remorse felt too convenient, arriving only after the police had done their work. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and shuffled papers between us. He explained that Aunt Sarah had requested temporary guardianship while the investigation continued. My stomach clenched. Living with someone who'd enabled Jake for months seemed worse than staying with Mrs. Chen, who at least treated me with neutral kindness. The meeting ended with Aunt Sarah promising to return the next day. She hugged me awkwardly at the door, her perfume overwhelming. I noticed she wore Mom's bracelet, the silver one with tiny hearts that Dad had given her for their anniversary. My chest tightened, seeing it on the wrong wrist. Back at Mrs. Chen's house, I found Jake's former tutor sitting in the living room, sipping tea. My blood ran cold. The woman smiled warmly and mentioned running into Jake at a coffee shop recently. She laughed while recounting one of Dad's favorite historical jokes that Jake had shared. The casual way she quoted my father's words through Jake's voice made me excuse myself to the bathroom, where I gripped the sink until my knuckles went white. Mrs. Chen later mentioned the tutor had stopped by hoping to offer me free sessions, concerned about my education during this difficult time. I declined politely, recognizing Jake's manipulation even from behind bars. He was already building his character witnesses, painting himself as the devoted brother who'd even remembered our father's jokes. The next morning brought a new complication. Jake's lawyer had filed for an emergency custody hearing, claiming I was being manipulated by authorities and needed stable family care. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Mr. Peterson warned me to prepare for Jake's supporters to paint me as troubled and unstable. I spent hours documenting everything I could remember. The timeline of Mom's mysterious fatigue, Dad's confusion in his final weeks, Jake's convenient absences during their worst episodes. My hand cramped from writing, but I couldn't stop. Each memory felt like evidence slipping away if I didn't capture it. At school, the atmosphere had shifted. Jake's Twitch followers had found my social media accounts. Comments flooded in defending him, calling me ungrateful and delusional. Someone had screenshotted my old texts, complaining about my parents' strict rules and shared them widely. The posts from last year where I'd written, "My parents are ruining my life," over a missed party, now seemed like ammunition against me. During chemistry class, I accidentally knocked over a beaker while distracted by my phone buzzing with notifications. The teacher frowned and asked if I was using substances to cope with stress. The suggestion made my hands shake worse. By the end of the day, I'd been called to the guidance counselor's office for a mandatory evaluation. The counselor, Mrs. Nathans, had known Mom professionally. She spoke gently about grief manifesting in different ways. When I tried explaining about Jake, she nodded sympathetically, but wrote notes about projection and complicated grief response. Her report would go directly to the family court judge. That evening, I discovered Jake had given Ashley access to our parents' Netflix account. She'd been using Mom's profile, and the continue watching section still showed Mom's comfort shows. I stared at the screen, seeing profile watching under Mom's name, as if she might walk in any moment to finish her episode. When I tried to remove Ashley's access, I found Jake had changed the password, another piece of my parents' lives he controlled from jail. 3 days without proper sleep left me foggy during a chemistry lab. I mixed up the instructions, creating a minor reaction that required evacuation. The teacher mandated substance testing, despite my exhausted explanation. The incident report would join the growing pile of documentation about my concerning behavior. Jake's influence spread like poison through my support systems. Mia's mother needed his professor's recommendation for her teaching license renewal. Suddenly, Mia's texts grew shorter, less frequent. When I confronted her at lunch, she admitted her parents thought it best if we took some space. The last real friendship I had dissolved through fear, rather than anger. I started investigating Jake's college activities online, searching for evidence of his lies. The deep dive into his social media triggered Mia to text me about cyberstalking. Screenshots of my searches appeared in a Facebook group called Prayers for Jake that had somehow gained over 800 members. Neighbors I'd known for years now crossed the street to avoid me. The custody hearing arrived too quickly. Jake appeared via video link from jail, looking haggard but playing the part of a concerned brother perfectly. His lawyer presented my school incidents, the substance test request, my obsessive social media behavior. They'd even obtained Ring doorbell footage of me sneaking out months ago, evidence of my delinquent tendencies requiring structure. I tried to remain calm as Jake spoke about wanting to protect me, to honor our parents' memory by keeping our family together. He mentioned the Hawaii trip had been his graduation gift from our parents. I wanted to scream that he'd told me it was their anniversary trip, but my lawyer motioned for me to stay quiet. Both versions sounded equally plausible, and I realized I wasn't even sure which was true anymore. The judge ordered mandatory therapy sessions as part of any custody arrangement. She spoke about grief responses and the need for stability. Jake's lawyer pushed for supervised visits between us to begin healing the family unit. The suggestion made bile rise in my throat. After court, I overheard 2 teachers discussing the case. One supported Jake, remembering him as a stellar student. The other supported me but admitted she couldn't testify due to an anonymous complaint filed about her inappropriate interest in a minor student. Jake's network was eliminating my defenders systematically. I returned to Mrs. Chen's house to find 7-year-old Joni from next door on the porch. He looked up at me with innocent eyes and asked why I didn't want Jake to be happy. The question, clearly planted by careful adult conversation, hit harder than any accusation. Even children were being turned against me. Using Mom's Amazon password on an old tablet, I checked the order history. My pulse quickened finding books about home repair and HVAC systems ordered 2 months before their trip. DIY heating solutions sat in the saved cart like a smoking firearm. I screenshot everything, building my evidence folder methodically. Jake's Twitch streams from jail became events. He spoke about dealing with grief while raising a difficult teenager, about the burden of being a young guardian. Donations poured in from sympathetic viewers. He wore Dad's watch during streams, used phrases our father always said. The complete absorption of our parents' identities made me physically ill. During a particularly bad night, Jake's lawyer contacted me with an offer. Jake would allow me to visit our parents' graves alone, something I hadn't been able to do since the arrest, if I stopped making accusations. They framed it as generous grief allowance. When I refused, it became evidence that I didn't even care enough to visit my parents properly. Everything shifted when Mr. Peterson revealed new information. My parents had been worried about Jake, but not for unaliving plans. They'd discovered his gambling addiction had reached dangerous levels, over $30,000 in debt to online casinos. The wire transfer I'd thought was unaliving payment was actually a tuition loan from our parents, proving financial desperation, but not homicidal intent. Mom's journal surfaced from a recipe box in the kitchen. Her careful handwriting documented concerns about Jake's debts, his desperate behavior, his mood swings. She'd known I was struggling too, but had focused on Jake's crisis. Reading her words about choosing to help him over addressing my anxiety felt like another loss. The revelation reframed everything. Jake genuinely believed our parents would have wanted him to inherit everything. Years of being the perfect son while I rebelled had convinced him he deserved it. His desperation mixed with real grief created a complex motivation that made him more sympathetic to outsiders. My grandmother had to choose between believing me or maintaining her only family connection through Jake. After agonizing days, she chose the safe relationship with Jake. cutting off my only potential sanctuary. She couldn't risk losing her last link to her son, even if it meant abandoning me. Desperation drove me to create a fake dating profile to befriend Ashley. Through manufactured conversations, I extracted information about Jake's activities before our parents' death. The deception felt wrong, but I'd learned Jake's tactics were the only way to fight back. A chance encounter at a coffee shop with Jake's professor revealed Jake hadn't attended classes regularly last semester. Casual questions while waiting for lattes uncovered his concerning absence patterns. The public graduation list confirmed what I'd suspected. Jake's name was missing despite his claims to our parents about finishing school. Our parents' best friends emerged from the woodwork, offering to take me in. Their kindness seemed genuine until I overheard them discussing the valuable house inheritance. Everyone had an angle. Trust became impossible. Managing battles on multiple fronts caused me to miss crucial court-ordered counseling. The absence marked me as non-compliant in official records. Each small failure compounded into larger consequences. Jake's girlfriend's mother, who happened to be the school principal, removed me from the honor roll citing behavioral issues affecting the academic environment. Some nights, I slept in Mia's garage while Jake's old friends partied in our family home. He posted about moving forward and healing through community while I shivered in a sleeping bag. The invertedness of our situations, him supported despite being jailed, me isolated despite being the victim, felt like living in an alternate reality. Aunt Sarah flew in again, begging me to let our parents rest in peace. She sobbed about how my accusations were unaliving her too. The guilt trip worked partially. I wondered if seeking justice was worth destroying the family remnants. Jake's lawyer filed an emergency motion advancing the custody hearing by 2 months. My legal aid attorney was unreachable, visiting a sick parent out of state. The system moved forward without proper representation for me. Each legal maneuver felt like another trap closing. During a moment of exhausted vulnerability, Mr. Peterson asked what I'd do if our parents' death really was accidental. The question haunted me because I couldn't immediately answer. Doubt crept in like fog, obscuring the certainty I'd clung to. I finally admitted to school officials about my past anxiety medication and self-harm from years ago. The admission was meant to explain that my current behavior wasn't a breakdown but part of a longer pattern. Instead, it became more evidence of my instability. Manipulating Jake's addiction became my weapon. I left casino advertisements around the house, hoping to trigger a relapse that would prove his unfitness. The strategy meant abandoning moral high ground, using his own tactics against him. Mom would have hated what I was becoming. Jake's public Venmo transactions showed casino payments just days before our parents' trip. The evidence felt solid until his lawyer explained them as him trying to win money to pay back what he'd borrowed. Desperation reframed as devotion. A small victory came when I won temporary custody of myself through emergency provisions. But seeing Jake sob at our parents' grave on the security footage, his flowers wilting beside mine, reminded me we shared genuine grief beneath the legal battles. The retired detective Dad had roomed with in college reached out unofficially. Over coffee, he suggested looking at paper trails and patterns rather than dramatic evidence. His hypothetical advice about what would matter in court gave me new direction. But he couldn't investigate directly without compromising potential cases. Discovery documents revealed our parents knew Jake had keys to the Hawaii property. They'd stayed anyway, hoping to help him through his crisis. The revelation that they'd chosen his potential redemption over their safety hit hard. They'd loved him too much to protect themselves. More evidence surfaced about Jake's pre-trip activities. An Airbnb maintenance log showed he'd signed in as a family friend doing a courtesy check. He'd noted the heater was working perfectly. The documentation created a clear trail of access and knowledge. I presented each piece of evidence calmly in preliminary hearings. Jake's visible panic brought no satisfaction, only sadness. The pattern was clear: gambling debts, desperate texts to parents, property access, mechanical knowledge, all the pieces aligned for investigators. 3 teachers publicly supported Jake while 2 quietly supported me. The school divided based on who needed recommendations and who could afford to pick sides. Even education became political in small towns touched by scandal. Ashley's younger sister asked me why I was being mean to Jake during a chance encounter. She mentioned how he helped with her homework, his kindness to her family. Children's innocent trust had been weaponized against me. Every interaction became a potential trap. The judge explained that circumstantial evidence, while compelling, wasn't enough without direct proof of tampering. The legal system required certainties I couldn't provide. Jake's sworn statement about never visiting the property contradicted a parking receipt found in his car. But even that wasn't enough. Mom's final journal entries revealed they'd been documenting Jake's behavior to force an intervention, not build a criminal case. Their goal was rehabilitation, not prosecution. Every piece of evidence came with context that softened its impact. I learned to document everything through photos and written logs. The meticulous timeline building became my obsession, but also my adaptation. Each failure taught me new strategies. The girl who trusted everyone became someone who recorded everything. Jake scheduled all important meetings during my crucial finals, forcing me to choose between grades and evidence gathering. The calculated timing showed his strategic thinking even from confinement. Every decision became a trap with consequences. His complete absorption of our parents' identities disturbed me most. He wore Dad's watch, used Mom's coffee mug in photos, even smelled like her lavender lotion in court appearances. The transformation went beyond inheritance, seeking into something deeper and more disturbing. Winning temporary custody felt hollow when the criminal investigation remained slow. Both sides prepared for the final custody hearing with full knowledge that criminal charges might change everything. The legal system ground forward at its own pace. Community support split down invisible lines. Those who'd seen warning signs faced those who'd enabled the situation. Thanksgiving would never be the same in our neighborhood. Some bridges burned while others revealed their weak foundations. The mounting pressure pushed both Jake and me toward final confrontations. Evidence accumulated while relationships crumbled. The truth became less important than survival in a system that favored documentation over justice. As the custody hearing approached, I realized my parents' tragedy had become a public spectacle. Their private struggles were now court records. Their love for both children had become evidence of negligence. The family they'd tried to save was destroyed by the very attempt. Jake's counterclaims gained momentum when my methods were exposed in court. The fake dating profile, the planted casino advertisements, the manipulation tactics I'd learned from him. Fighting monsters had made me monstrous in the eyes of the law. Both sides prepared final arguments while investigators worked behind the scenes. The criminal case would determine everything, but family court moved faster. Jake and I were locked in mutual destruction, each victory Pyrrhic. The detective's advice about patterns proved valuable. Hardware store receipts showed Jake purchasing specific valve parts that, when installed incorrectly, would cause carbon monoxide buildup. The technical knowledge required matched his computer studies. Finally, concrete evidence emerged. But even solid evidence came with complications. Jake's breakdown in custody showed genuine mental illness alongside criminal intent. His gambling addiction, untreated depression, and our parents' enabling created a tragedy of mutual destruction. The clear villain narrative crumbled into complex human failure. As final preparations began, I sat in Mom's garden, now overgrown and wild. The plants she'd tended with such care had either died or grown beyond recognition. Like our family, the careful cultivation had collapsed without her guidance. Tomorrow would bring resolution, but tonight I grieved for the family we'd all failed to save. The discovery documents arrived at Mrs. Chen's house in a thick manila envelope. I spread them across the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I sorted through witness statements and evidence logs. The Airbnb maintenance records showed Jake's signature 3 times, once as himself checking the property, twice more using variations of Dad's name. The handwriting analysis confirmed what I already knew. Mr. Peterson arrived that evening with more files. He laid out hardware store receipts showing Jake had purchased a specific brass valve fitting 2 days before our parents left. The same type of valve that, when installed backward, would cause carbon monoxide to leak into the cabin instead of venting outside. He'd paid cash, but the security footage was clear. The final custody hearing was set for the following Monday. I spent the weekend organizing evidence into chronological order, creating a timeline that showed Jake's desperation escalating as his gambling debts mounted. The pattern was undeniable. Desperate texts to our parents begging for money, their refusal citing his previous theft, then the sudden flurry of activity around their trip. Ashley's younger sister knocked on Mrs. Chen's door Sunday afternoon. She handed me a USB drive, explaining that Ashley had asked her to deliver it. Inside were screenshots of Jake's messages to Ashley from the weeks before our parents died. He'd written about feeling trapped, about our parents threatening to cut him off completely, about needing to find a solution before they returned from Hawaii. Monday morning arrived too quickly. The courthouse steps felt endless as I climbed them with Mr. Peterson. Inside, the courtroom was packed with divided community members. Some wore buttons supporting Jake, others sat quietly on my side. The empty seats where our parents would have sat felt like gaping wounds. Jake appeared on the video screen from jail, his hands visibly shaking as he held a glass of water. When the judge asked him to state his name for the record, his voice cracked. I noticed he still wore Dad's watch, the metal band catching the light as he moved. The prosecutor presented evidence methodically, building an unavoidable narrative. Bank records showed Jake's casino debts had reached $42,000. Text messages revealed loan sharks threatening violence. Our parents' journal entries documented their growing fear of what Jake might do if cornered. When Ashley took the stand, she kept her eyes down. Under oath, she admitted Jake had asked her to lie about the timing of their Vegas trip. She explained how he'd claimed it was to surprise her, but she'd later discovered he needed an alibi for the weekend our parents died. Her voice broke as she described finding his notebook with heater diagrams and carbon monoxide calculations. The judge called a recess after Ashley's testimony. In the hallway, I watched Jake's supporters slowly drift away, their certainty crumbling under the weight of evidence. Even his former tutor left quietly, her face pale with realization. After lunch, the detective presented the technical evidence. He explained how the valve Jake purchased would create a slow leak when installed incorrectly. The carbon monoxide would build up gradually over hours, causing drowsiness before unconsciousness. Our parents would have simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Jake's lawyer tried to argue it was all circumstantial, but the parking receipt from the hardware store placed Jake there at the exact time the valve was purchased. Security footage showed him studying the store's HVAC display for 20 minutes before making his selection. The most damaging evidence came from Jake himself. His sworn statement claimed he'd never visited the Hawaii property, but investigators found his fingerprints on the heater access panel. When confronted with his contradiction, Jake's composure finally shattered. Through the video link, I watched my brother break down completely. His shoulders shook as he admitted to tampering with the heater. He insisted he'd only wanted them to get sick enough to come home early, to give him more time to figure out his debt situation. He swore he never meant for them to die. The prosecutor offered me input on the charging recommendation. I could push for unaliving charges or support reckless endangerment resulting in death. I thought about Mom's journal entries, her desperate hope that Jake could be saved. I thought about Dad's patient attempts to help him with his addiction. I chose reckless endangerment with mandatory addiction treatment. Mr. Peterson nodded approvingly as I explained my reasoning to the prosecutor. Our parents would have wanted Jake to get help, not just punishment. The judge ordered a full criminal investigation based on the evidence presented. Jake would remain in custody pending trial. As for my custody, the judge granted me emancipation given my age and circumstances. The house would need to be sold to cover legal fees, but a modest trust from my parents' life insurance would support me through college. The courtroom emptied slowly after the verdict. I noticed how people avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the messy reality of our family tragedy. There were no clear heroes or villains, just broken people who'd failed each other in different ways. Outside, the community fractures were visible in the parking lot. Neighbors who'd supported Jake couldn't look at those who'd believed me. Friendships that had lasted decades ended in silent acknowledgement that some things couldn't be forgiven or forgotten. Mrs. Chen helped me pack my belongings that evening. I was moving to a small apartment near the high school, close enough to finish my senior year, but far enough from the memories that haunted every corner of our family home. She hugged me goodbye, pressing a container of homemade soup into my hands. The next morning, I met with a grief counselor Mr. Peterson had recommended. She specialized in complex loss and family trauma. I spent the first session just sitting in silence, unable to find words for everything that had happened. At school, the atmosphere had shifted again. Without Jake's active manipulation, people seemed unsure how to treat me. Some offered awkward condolences, others maintained their distance. I focused on my studies, determined to graduate despite everything. I visited our parents' graves alone for the first time since Jake's arrest. Fresh flowers lay beside the headstones, not mine. The card was signed simply, J. Even from jail, even after everything, he was still their son. I added my own flowers and sat on the grass, finally able to grieve without fear or anger overshadowing the loss. The house sold quickly to a young family excited about the neighborhood. I watched from across the street as they moved in, their children running through the same yard where Jake and I had played. Life moved forward whether we were ready or not. Jake's trial date was set for spring. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal. 15 years with possibility of parole in 2007, mandatory addiction treatment throughout. It felt both too harsh and too lenient. Justice rarely satisfied anyone completely. I started my senior year at a new school across town. Nobody knew my story there, which brought its own kind of relief. I joined the environmental club and made a few cautious friendships, always careful not to share too much too quickly. Some nights I still set 3 plates at dinner in my small apartment, habit dying harder than grief. Other nights I managed just one, slowly accepting the reality of my solitary life. Healing wasn't linear. It came in waves and setbacks. Mr. Peterson continued overseeing my trust, checking in monthly to ensure I had everything I needed. He'd become the closest thing to family I had left, though we both maintained professional boundaries. Some connections were too important to risk with closeness. I received a letter from Jake 6 months into his sentence. His handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. Acknowledgement of what he'd done, the pain he'd caused, the lives he'd destroyed. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted me to know he was getting help. I kept the letter but didn't respond. Maybe someday I'd find words for him, but that day wasn't today. Instead, I focused on building a life our parents would have been proud of, one careful day at a time. The restraining order meant Jake and I couldn't have contact for 2 years minimum. By then, I'd be in college, hopefully far enough away to build something separate from our shared tragedy. We'd never be a family again, but maybe we could eventually be two people who'd survived the same disaster. On the anniversary of our parents' death, I returned to their graves. Jake's flowers were already there, white roses, Mom's favorite. I added my own yellow ones, Dad's preferred choice. We mourned separately but simultaneously, forever connected by loss and betrayal. I graduated high school with honors, surprising everyone including myself. The principal handed me my diploma with genuine pride. In the audience, Mrs. Chen and Mr. Peterson clapped enthusiastically. I'd built a different kind of family. Chosen, careful, but real. College acceptance letters arrived in spring. I chose a school 3 states away, far enough for a fresh start but close enough to return for Jake's eventual parole hearings. Distance helped, but some responsibilities couldn't be abandoned entirely. The night before leaving for college, I drove past our old house one last time. The new family had painted it yellow and added a swing set. Children's laughter drifted through windows. The house had healed even if we hadn't. I sent Jake money for commissary once a month, never with a note but consistently. It felt like what our parents would have wanted, not forgiveness, not reconnection, just basic human acknowledgement that he was still my brother, broken as that bond had become. 2 years later, I sat in my dorm room reading about restorative justice programs. Psychology had become my major, driven by a need to understand how families could destroy themselves so completely. My professor suggested I might consider specializing in family trauma counseling. The irony wasn't lost on me, using our tragedy to help others navigate theirs. But maybe that's how healing worked sometimes. You took the broken pieces and built something different, something that could help.